about to leave, already packing. Come with me, I'm not really asking. We'll get away to a place where we don't know. About to see the world in action, what we can be, life with no distractions. We'll get away, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out, die with my own doubts. Be free with me. Let's go, let's be free with Not looking back, eyes on the freeway, Bonnie and Clyde, a classic cliche. We're on the run, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out, die with my own doubts. Be free.
Evening everyone, it's Jim here. Welcome to our latest GCSE live revision session. I'm joined by Shanique and Vicky tonight to take a look at transnational corporations. Good to see you. We've had a few internet issues, but at the minute we're all here, which is good.
Yeah, hopefully.
We should be fine. So a warm welcome to everyone who's joining us live. And last week we had several hundred students who also joined us on the catch-up or replay feature on YouTube, which is fantastic. It's always great to have students joining us live, but we know that lots and lots of students also use these sessions to help revision. So if that's you, welcome too. The way it works is that we go through a series of activities, but also interspersed with that some key content reminders. Now don't worry about writing it all down, because of course you'll be able to download the slides from this session like all our other sessions, and also if you want catch up the video again on replay. So I'm sure there's some stuff, really useful stuff you can add to your notes. Vicky, do you want to introduce us, and then we'll get off and running with the first session?
Yeah,
the first activity.
So it's our third paper 2 topic. We've already covered the development gap, and we looked at urban issues the first week when we started looking at paper 2. So today we are looking at those transnational corporations and how they operate either in newly emerging economies or low income countries. And you need to know about these for your paper 2 exam. They are possibly going to come up in your mock. They will definitely feature in your final exams at the end of the course. So we are going to kick off this evening session with the suitcase scanner activity. So what do all of the companies have in common, and how many of them can you spot? Are there any of those that you recognise? Pop them in the chat window. The scanner is going to go across a couple of times, and you've got a moment or two just to get some ideas into that chat window for us. Jim, can we get the scanner going, please? Excellent. So what do these companies all have in common? It's quite a nice, easy question to get you starting off with. So if we can have a couple of answers into the chat window. And how many did you spot? It is just like Terminal 5 at Heathrow, but maybe with a little less queuing. You're correct. What do we think? So what do these companies all have in common? How many you can spot? I'm going to give you just a moment to get your answers into the chat window. Okay, Jim, can we have the answer up on the screen, please? Good, they are TNCs. They are those transnational corporations that we're going to be talking about in this session. So transnational corporations, those corporations that are recognisable across the globe. They tend to have their headquarters in high-income countries like the UK, and they operate right across the world, tending to do most of their production in low-income or newly emerging economies. We're going to talk today about how they help economic development, but also some of the disadvantages of those a bit later in this session. Jim, can we have the next slide up, please? Perfect. So today we're covering three things. We are firstly going to have a look at globalization and why it's occurred. We're going to think about TNCs, what they are and why they're branching out across the globe. And then we're going to think about what do they play in, like the role they play in relation to development in those developing countries. So we're going to look at the pros and cons of those. And then right at the end, we're going to do a bit of exam gold based on this. So Minecraft, that is a good question. Are transnational companies the same as multinational? Yeah, yes, they are. And it's nice to see that you're here despite the fact that you are not a geography student. It's always welcome to have, you're always very welcome. So what is globalization and what drives it? Well, it basically means it's economic development is really closely linked to globalization. And globalization is the free flow of goods, people, ideas, and money. And together these make that really complex web of interdependence. So interdependence is all about you being dependent on something and then being dependent on you. So for example, we're dependent on China to make lots and lots of our goods at a cheap price, but they're dependent on us for requesting those goods in the first place. So it links people and places right across the globe. And few people around the world are untouched by it. It's never been so easy to communicate with other people in far-flung places. So hopefully it is a key term that you are familiar with, and it does pop up in other subjects as well. So it's in sociology, you cover it in business studies. So if any of you are doing those GCSEs as well, hopefully you have come across it from that point of view as well. Jim, can we have the next one? So there are a number of factors that drive globalization that kind of make it this great big process. Again, I've seen it grow over the last few decades. So firstly, we have communication. So this is the growth of fibre and satellite communication technology, which has increased that global connection via our smartphones, the internet and satellite TV. So we know that we can video chat with people in other countries for free, for example. We can see places around the world online, such as global networks of live camera feeds. So actually you can go and have a look at anywhere you like, which increases our awareness of other places. Okay, that drives globalization further. You've then got trade. So improved technology and cheap aviation fuel means that fresh food can be flown from distant places to our supermarkets, and containerization means that we can import goods from all over the world. So this means that we have a varied diet, much more so than perhaps in the past, as we're able to import those goods that are out of season or we simply don't have the climate to grow. We also have those bigger, faster container ships, meaning that we can get more goods imported from overseas and we can receive them much, much more quickly. We then have culture, so Western styles of music, TV and film are released throughout the world at the same time, although many people might argue that perhaps westernisation of culture could be a negative thing. And then right at the bottom of the screen, we've got those TNCs that we've kind of already talked about. So large companies manufacture and sell their products in almost every country in the world. And that manufacturing tends to take place in low-income countries or newly emerging economies. So large companies can take advantage of cheap labour. Often there's no minimum wage there. They can also take advantage of relaxed health and safety laws. That, for example, they might have no minimum working age, no limits on those working hours, relaxed environmental laws, making it easier and cheaper to dispose of waste. So lots of things that drive globalization. So we're going to move on to our second activity. We're going to do the Christmas card big reveal. So can you work out what is in the big reveal using the clues given on the other Christmas cards? So Jim, can we have our first clue up, please? So clue number one is: this company is so successful that it has twice the amount of money as the US Treasury. So as we go along, if you can pop your guesses into the chat window. So the company is so successful that it has twice the amount of money as the US Treasury. Is it tutor for you? Well, maybe not twice the amount of money as in the US Treasury. We're not far behind. Clue number 2. This company originally had 3 co-founders, but one of them left the company after 12 days, selling his share for $800. So who do we think, or what company do we think that might be? Okay, so let's have clue 3 up on the screen. So to raise capital for this company, one of the co-founders, Steve Wozniak, had to sell his scientific calculator. Or we have a guess coming up in the chat window. So Tony thinks it's Apple. Let's have a look and see if you are correct in a moment. So the first company logo featured a drawing of Sir Isaac Newton. Our 4th clue. So far we have one guess, possibly Apple. Okay, and our final clue is the company name came from founder Steve Jobs' love of a particular fruit. Okay, let's have a look and see if we were correct. Okay, it is Apple. So that 3rd co-founder must be absolutely gutted that they left the company after 12 days, selling their share for $800, which is just bonkers. Right, thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Shanique now, who's going to talk to you about the role of TNCs in development.
Excellent. Thank you, Vicky. So we've seen multiple examples so far of TNCs in that suitcase scanner activity at the start. So we know that TNCs are companies that operate in multiple nations around the world. You probably would have interacted with a TNC today. So maybe think about what sort of TNCs have you actually interacted with. Maybe you're using an Apple laptop, or you might have had Starbucks today. TNCs, they can bring benefits to a country in which they operate and play a role in the development of that country. And the benefit for the companies who outsource their manufacturing are clear. So things like cheaper labour, relaxed laws with regards to their business operations, and fruitful tax incentives, which can lead to lower prices for consumers. Vicky will actually speak about the disadvantages, later on for different countries. But what we're going to focus on is looking at this idea of the multiplier effect. Thank you, Jim. So the multiplier effect, then, you should recall learning about this in lessons. And I always remind my students to think about it as a chain of events. So this leads to that, which then leads to that, and thinking about the benefits that could bring that these things could bring to LICS or NEEs. So the multiplier effect is an upward spiral of the economy and its benefit on employment. Positive multipliers are often triggered by a large investment, such as the opening of a new factory, for example, and this leads to different benefits for the host country. So I'm going to show you this. If we just go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So here we've got so these different factors that lead to this idea of the multiplier effect. And if we start up in the top left-hand corner, where you can see a TNC opens a new branch in a newly emerging economy or a low-income country, and this provides jobs directly within the company for people that live there, but also local firms that supply the TNC maybe with parts or services such as maintenance, they'll have more work. So that will obviously mean that they might need more staff. That will increase their income. And then we've got the next arrow down the bottom left there. Local people will earn more, and they might even have disposable income, so money, sort of extra money to spend. And so they might end up going to local cafes or shops, or spending that money, which will then benefit businesses even more, which might lead to even more staff being needed. So local businesses might have to take on extra staff as they have more customers to serve. And then as these businesses are making more money, they're obviously paying a lot more tax to the government, which means that the government or the local governments have more money to invest in infrastructure, in services such as schools and healthcare. And essentially, this will then lead to a strengthening of the economy and make the area more attractive. And then this cycle sort of continues. And this is the idea of the multiplier effect. So what we're going to do for our next activity then is, in the Christmas spirit, we're going to look at the melting snowman challenge. So you'll have 20 seconds to answer the question. before the snowman melts away. So there'll be 20 seconds on the clock. So have a look at the question and we'll have a think. So here's your question. List as many reasons as you can for TNCs to locate their manufacturing in LICs or newly emerging economies. So why would a TNC want to invest or want to locate the manufacturing in a low-income country or a newly emerging economy? So if you want to put your answers in the chat, you can see our snowman is melting away there. Okay, so we'll give you another 20 seconds then to have another think. Excellent. So Tony, I can see you've put there cheap labour. Yes, excellent. Any more? Low labour costs. Yep, excellent. Okay, so let's have a look at the answers then. So here I've written down cheaper labour, relaxed environmental laws. So even with things with regards to maybe working conditions where we may have like the minimum wage in the UK, there's a lot of countries, low-income countries, newly emerging economies that don't have that. So they've got sort of relaxed business laws in regards to environment and in regards to labour. Saves costs by not actually owning the factory. So sometimes these factories are already there and they just sort of use them. Government incentives such as tax breaks. Governments often want to encourage TNCs to operate in their country because they know the benefits it could potentially bring. So they often offer tax breaks, which obviously increase a company's profits. Excellent. Well done. Some really good answers in the chat there. So I'm just going to pass on to Vicky, who's going to speak about the advantages and disadvantages of TNCs.
Excellent. So globalization is always highly controversial. It's one of those processes where there are lots of winners and losers, and definitely sort of, if you are a richer country, you are much more likely to benefit from the process of globalization. However, there are lots of good points about TNCs operating in those newly emerging economies and low-income countries. Obviously, we've already talked about the multiplier effect. Shanique has given us a really good run-through of a good example of when something happens and all the sort of positive knock-on effects of that. And lots of the things up on the screen really in front of you are related to that multiplier effect. So those TNCs play a huge part in developing the economy of those developing countries, and they do help to reduce that development gap. So we have got, we talked about this multiplier effect, which is really, really positive for lots of these countries. Although there is, don't forget that the multiplier effect can actually be negative too. So we can talk about that in a few moments. So TNCs create many, many jobs, and these jobs are often better paid and more reliable than what was on offer before. So particularly for low-income countries, if you had lots of people working in the primary sector, so working in farming, that might have been seasonal, unreliable work, poorly paid, really difficult, in sort of, physically demanding. So therefore, these jobs might be better for your local population. Sometimes these jobs come with training and education. So, for example, your workers might be trained in ICT, or they might learn to speak another language. So, for example, they might learn to speak English. Sometimes the company will invest in facilities that improve the quality of life for local people. So they might invest in things like healthcare and schools or clean water, and so the sort of clean water supplies. And the reason they do this is because it actually makes that company look good. Okay, and obviously that's going to increase their sort of reputation in the area. They will often fund infrastructure improvements. So you might have new roads or railways, pipelines, all sorts of things there. This is going to help them trade much more easily with other countries, but it is also going to benefit your local people. So again, all of these things are the multiplier effect again, aren't they? But at the same time, these infrastructure improvements are going to make the area much more attractive, and that's potentially going to attract further investment in the future, which is a good thing. And TNCs also have to pay taxes. This is a little bit controversial because sometimes they don't pay quite as much tax as they should do. But if they are paying tax to the government of the host country, this will create that much needed revenue to spend on development projects or funding vital services such as health and education. Now, that's really important because if you think about those newly emerging economies and low-income countries, lots of workers often work in the informal sector where they're not actually receiving a proper salary, they're not getting benefits, but one of the things that they won't be paying is tax. So while that might be beneficial to the worker in the short term, in the long term that means the government's not getting that revenue, so therefore there's less money on those projects that are really, really vital. And of course, the one thing that I haven't mentioned yet is that they are going to increase the GNI in that country. They're going to bring lots and lots of money to that country. Can we have the next slide up? Excellent. So this time I'm going to talk to you about the disadvantages. So like I said, these TNCs locating in developing countries is often really, really controversial for a number of reasons. So we've already mentioned that one of the reasons that they like to go to developing countries is because of the relaxed environmental laws, which means that TNCs can create a lot of pollution. So for example, they might spill toxic chemicals into waterways, or it might be released into the air through burning things like leftover rubber. So quite a few years ago, Nike got heavily fined because they were burning rubber in Vietnam, which was a sort of a byproduct of their trainers, and they are often not prosecuted for these environmental crimes, or if they are, it can take a really long time for them to admit a liability and pay to clean up the damage. So lots of you will have studied the Bodo oil spills in 2008 and 2009, which devastated farmland and fishing waters in the Niger Delta in Nigeria. Lots of you will have studied this because it's a case study in one of the GCSE textbooks. So it actually took until 2015 for Shell Oil to actually agree to pay £55 million in damages, but also to clean up the swamps and the fishing grounds that had been heavily polluted, which caused the loss of livelihood for farmers and fishermen for a really, really, really long time. We also have conditions in those factories can be harsh. So I hope most of you will be aware of the term sweatshop. So people might work for really long hours for low pay, often in really, really dangerous conditions. So an example of this would be the Rana Plaza disaster that you might know about. This was a building which was home to many factories in Dhaka, which is the capital city in Bangladesh. It collapsed in 2013, killing over 1,000 people in the process. Again, a few of you will know the case study of Apple and how they work in Shenzhen in China. So there was a big factory there where Apple workers who were not working directly for Apple, but they were working for a company called Foxconn, who were making lots of products for Apple at the time, working in really horrible, horrible conditions. Lots of workers took their own lives because of the conditions they were working in. So rather than try and improve conditions in these factories, what Foxconn decided to do was just to put suicide nets up outside the window so workers could not take their own lives while they're at work, which is obviously a horrible, horrible way to deal with those harsh conditions in the factory. But one of the things that Shanique mentioned was that often big companies don't own the factories they operate in, and actually this can be a really good thing for these companies because it means that they don't really have to take a huge amount of responsibility for what goes on inside those factories because they don't actually own them. They're just outsourcing work to those factories. We have economic leakage, so where most profits are sent abroad, benefiting the shareholders mainly. So the best paid jobs also tend to go to people from the origin country rather than those where a branch has been set up. We've also got TNCs that can exert pressure on governments, and they can leave without warning. They leave without warning, that's going to trigger a negative multiplier effect, so you're going to end up with lots of job losses there and sort of economic decline. But because they exert pressure on governments, they're really powerful. Governments find them really, really hard to control, and often they can bribe political parties through financial contributions. And if we're thinking about those newly emerging economies and low-income countries, and it's already been mentioned in the chat that there are times when we have corrupt governments in those countries, which means those governments might be quite happy to take a bribe. And then finally, they've got the last one on the screen is they often use many natural resources taken away from local people. So probably the most famous example of this one would be Coca-Cola, which had a big bottling plant in Kerala in India. Local people protested that they had extracted far too much groundwater, causing wells to run dry, meaning there was no drinking water and no water for irrigation, which had an enormous impact on local farmers. So Jim, can we have the connection wall up that goes with this? So we have a festive connection wall on the screen. The wall contains 16 key phrases which are grouped into 4 groups of 4. Can you find those connections, please? Okay. So have a look on the screen here. What are the connections of these on this festive connection wall? They're all to do with the impacts of these big companies. Okay, so the first, to give you a little bit of a clue and a bit of a help, the first things we're looking for are the economic impacts of TNCs in these newly emerging economies. So if you can just give yourself a couple of minutes, pop down the numbers and letters into the chat window. Have a look. Which ones do you think are to do with economic impacts? So economic impacts are all to do with money. What do we think? Okay, if you are watching this on catch up, obviously you can pause it and you can give yourself a little bit more. Okay, what do we think? So we have got across the top skills and training provided, chemicals leaked into waterways, infrastructure improvements, toxic fumes emitted, afford better access to healthcare and education, local workers are often poorly paid, oil spills, job creation, workers are often exploited, relaxed environmental laws, working conditions can be unsafe, tax incentives, loss of habitat, cheaper labour, economic leakage occurs, and access to a wider market. Okay, so we have got some good answers coming up on the screen at the moment. So let's have a look, Jim. Can we see the first lot of impacts? So our first impacts are economic. So we've got skills and training provided. We've got those local workers are often poorly paid. We've got job creation. We've got economic leakage occurs. So we've got a couple of good impacts there and a couple of negative impacts. So the next ones that I would like you to look at are social impacts. So these are to do with people. So think about things that are not money linked, but these are to do with people. So it might be about health, possibly could be about education. What do we think? Again, if you are watching on catch up, give yourself a little bit of a pause, give yourself a bit more time, as the connection wall is always one of those activities that's a bit tight for time in our study streams. I'll give you a couple more moments to see if you can come up with any impacts that are social. So we've got the economic ones on the screen. Okay, so we've got a suggestion of A2, A3. One of those is correct. Let's have a look. C3, absolutely. Okay, Jim, can we have them up on the screen, please? So we have got the able to afford access to education and healthcare, because you're getting paid more. Workers are often exploited. Obviously, that's a negative. The working conditions can be unsafe. Those two tend to go hand in hand. But we've got those infrastructure improvements that can benefit the local community. So, for example, new roads, which would mean that people can travel around much more easily, much more safely than before. So our next lot of impacts are going to be environmental impacts. So we've got 8 left on the screen. Which ones of those are to do with the environment? And once you've worked out that, if you can start thinking about what links our last 4 things. So our environmental impacts, which of those on the screen are to do with environments? Okay, so we have got Tony coming through. So B1, D1, A4, C2. I think you might have nailed it there. Let's have a look. So we have got, Jim, if we can have those on the screen, chemicals leaked into the waterway, toxic fumes emitted, oil spills and loss of habitat. Well done. So we have 4 on the screen. We've got relaxed environmental laws, cheaper labour, tax incentives and access to a wider market. What links these last 4? So it's not impacts this time, but what is the link here? So I'm just going to give you a moment, have a think. What links those last 4 boxes on our screen? So the relaxed environmental laws, cheaper labour, the tax incentives and access to a wider market. Excellent. We've got a couple of suggestions coming through. So do we think it's reasons why TNCs invest in LICs and NEEs? Let's have a look and see if you are correct. It is. So why they choose to locate in foreign countries. Well done. Excellent. Some really good suggestions coming through in that chat window. So I'm going to hand over to Shanique now, who's going to do a little bit of exam practice with you.
Excellent. Thank you, Vicky. So up on the screen then we've got an example of a question that you could possibly get on in your mocks potentially about TNCs. So the question is, using a case study of a low-income country or a newly emerging economy, explain the link between TNCs and industrial development in the country. And this is a 6-mark question. So it's quite a common question that could come up. So I want you to think about what would you need in order to answer that question then. Thinking of that 6-mark question. Okay, it's an explain question. So you need to be using connectives in order to link your answers together. And really key there is the first sort of phrase of the sentence, using a case study. So you'd have to think back to the low-income country or the newly emerging economy that you would have studied in class. So if we go to the next slide. So I've got some points here that you should think about. So what sort of jobs are being provided? You might want to think about the different employment sectors that these jobs are being provided in. How has the economic structure changed due to the TNC? And the multiplier effect, so what we spoke about before, what are the knock-on benefits and how could those knock-on benefits actually lead to industrial development in a particular country? So some of you would have studied possibly Nigeria. You might have looked at Shell and them investing and creating over 60,000 jobs for people in the Niger Delta. So if we go to the next slide then, we'll see what an examiner would want to see. So they'll want to see an understanding of TNCs and industrial development. Those are your sorts of key terms in that question. And they'll want to know that you understand what a TNC is and what actually they provide and how that can lead to development. An examiner will also want to see a consideration of what industry was like in the country before the TNC investment and what it's like now. So how has that improved development, or how has that led to development? Think about the different types of jobs provided. So I mentioned before the employment sectors. A lot of the time these TNCs are investing in the secondary sector, so possibly in improving incomes because of the higher wages that they yield as opposed to the primary sector. An examiner will also want you to suggest the knock-on benefits. So again, thinking about the multiplier effect. So this has led to this, which has led to that. So an example, as I said before, could be like Shell in the Niger Delta and the fact that workers are now working, and then thinking about the multiplier effect, but using examples that you've learnt in lessons. So employees paying more taxes and how those taxes could be used by the government in order to develop the country. Okay, so well done there having to think about that. It's really important when it comes to your exams to think about the questions that you're asking and think about how can you link what you've learnt to the question without just writing everything you know about TNCs, but picking out the specific information in order to answer that question. Excellent. So I'm going to pass to Vicky because we've got the last final activity of Cracker the Codes in the Christmas spirit again. Are you there, Vicky?
Looks like we've lost Vicky. Her internet has just gone down. So should we? Do you want to run this one, Shanique? Or
together then.
okay,
so
yeah, cool.
On the screen, you've got 6 different TNCs. So I want you to put the TNCs in order of market capitalization. So that just means the value of the company traded on the stock market. So we're looking at the value of the company in order. So we've got Walt Disney, we've got Walmart, we've got Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Coca-Cola. So this is probably going to be a guess, but that's fine. So if you want to put those in the chat, you can just put the letters in the correct order that you think.
I suppose we're looking for 6 letters in order, aren't we? In descending order. So the most valuable first, the TNC with the highest market cap.
Excellent. We've got.
I tell you what. Have as many goes as you want. I think we were all going to put Apple first, but Minecraft was first in with D, Apple. So D is correct, isn't it? I think, Shanique?
Yeah, I think I would have put Apple first.
But what comes after Apple?
What could come after Apple? So we've got an F on there. Coca-Cola possibly. We've got an E as well. Maybe Facebook. Okay.
Yeah, it's so we've not got the right answer yet. We'll give you another 30 seconds to see if somebody can. Oh, hang on, now we're getting close. Sean has gone for DCE ABF. That is so close, Sean.
So close.
You are so close. You've got the first 3 right, I think, Shanique.
Yeah, definitely.
But
got
not
the first 3 right.
You got the first 3 right. So DCE. So who's going to be first?
Walmart,
Yeah, it is DCE to start with.
So Walmart, Coca-Cola, and Walt Disney. Which order do you think they'll go in? So you got the first 3 right.
Vicky is back with us.
Excellent.
Yeah, I'm really sorry.
And we've just got a correct answer.
We have the winner. That was perfectly timed
Well
as
done,
Vicky
my friend.
arrived.
Excellent.
It is. Yeah, there we are. Oh, that was a Christmas cracker.
Okay.
There it is.
There you go.
Apple, Amazon. No sign of Tuesday on there, Vicky.
No, we were just number 7, so we've just dropped off.
Actually, though, it's interesting. The combined market capitalization of Apple and Tutor2U is about 2.3 billion.
Excellent.
If you add the 2 of them together, which is quite impressive, isn't it?
I'm sure.
I was quite surprised how low Coca-Cola was. Obviously, it's been pretty much the leading company for years and years, hasn't it?
Yeah,
They dominate, don't they? They have a 50% share of the global market. They've got lots of different brands, haven't they? But I suppose it's it's technology, isn't it? Technology. Amazon. I mean, obviously the retail side is big, but their most profitable part is the stuff that's running this. Amazon Web Services, hosting, servers, all that kind of stuff. Amazing. Never heard of Apple, he said, as he switches his MacBook off, checks his Apple Watch, and looks at his Mac Mini. Fantastic. Shanique and Vicky, thanks for so much for coming back and joining us for the last minute or 2.
Really sorry, I don't know what happened.
Well, it was fun. But that was a cracking session, another cracking session. So many thanks. I know you've had 2 very busy teaching days, the 2 of you, so we really do appreciate you taking some time out in the evening to run these sessions for us. And well done to everyone who's been watching live. And of course, we know from last week that we have 200 or 300, 400 replay viewers as the session gets used in class and as people catch up. So if you've been having any activities, hopefully you've done as well as the live audience. What do you think, Vicky? Shanique, anything else to say before we sign off?
Just join us next week. We are looking at the post-industrial economy of the UK, which is quite a tricky topic. Join us at the same time.
I'll post a link in the live chat. Sorry, I forgot to mention it on the screen there. We've got some paper 2 revision question cards that are really useful if you've got some mocks and assessments coming up. So if you fancy some extra question practice, quite a nice way to sort of revise whilst you're sat at home or on the bus or whatever, just chilling out. I'll post a link in the comments box to those. Take a look at those. See if you think those might be useful. Paper 1 as well, of course. Right, awesome. Many thanks. We're going to sign off now. Hopefully we'll see you this time next week for our next GCSE Geography live session. See you later.
Bye.
Cheers.